What if an ordinary man could step off a plane carrying a passport from a country that does not exist? What if every document in his wallet was real to him, but impossible to anyone else? And what if, after hours of questioning, he vanished from a locked hotel room like he had never been there at all?
In 1954, at Tokyo Haneda Airport, a man arrived who should not have existed. His name was not recognized by any government. His country, Taured, could not be found on any map. And the case that followed has lived for decades in the space between fact, folklore, and something far more unsettling. Because if the story is true, then one of two things must be real. Either the man was lying, or reality was. It began like any other arrival. A businessman landed in Tokyo from an international flight. He was well-dressed, middle-aged, calm and polite. He spoke several languages. He carried himself like someone used to borders, airports, schedules, and paperwork. That was the first reason no one suspected anything unusual. He handed over his passport at customs, and that was when the trouble started. The passport looked authentic, not cheap, not forged in the obvious sense. It had official stamps. It had a seal. It had pages filled with travel history. The problem was the issuing country. Taured. The customs officers had never heard of it. They asked him where Taured was located. He reportedly pointed to a place on a map of Europe, near Andorra, as if the answer should be obvious. He insisted it had existed for centuries. He insisted he had traveled internationally before. He insisted that this was his home country. The officers checked again. No Taured. They brought out atlases. No Taured. They asked for more identification. He had other documents, including a driver's license and business papers. The story says all of them matched the same impossible nation. Every item reinforced the same absurd fact. This man was on paper a citizen of a country that did not exist. This was no theatrical fraud. He did not behave like a prankster. He became irritated, confused, then increasingly frustrated. From his perspective, the officials were the ones making a mistake. That detail matters. Because the most disturbing stories are rarely about monsters. They are about disagreement. Two versions of reality, two incompatible truths, and one human being trapped between them. The officers detained him for questioning, not because he had committed a dramatic crime, but because they could not process what they were seeing. His papers were either impossible or proof of something they had never imagined. He was placed under supervision while officials tried to determine who he was, where he came from, and how such a passport could exist. And then the story becomes even stranger. The man cooperated, at least at first. He answered questions calmly. He gave details about his supposed business trip. He described routes, cities, and connections. He seemed to know geography well. He was not a person inventing a fantasy from scratch. He sounded like someone describing a world that was real to him and wrong to everyone else. That is what makes the tale endure. Not just the impossible passport, the confidence. He reportedly explained that Taured was an old European nation. He was irritated that Japanese authorities did not know it. To him, their confusion was like someone denying the existence of France or Spain. Officials allegedly examined his travel history and found stamps from many countries. If the later retellings are accurate, his paperwork showed legitimate movement across borders. That made the situation more difficult, not less. A fake passport could be explained. A consistent set of documents tied to a non-existent nation could not. The man was taken to a hotel or guest accommodation while authorities continued their investigation. Some versions of the story say he was placed under guard. Others say the room was secured by staff and officials. The central point remains the same. He was not free to wander off. He was watched. He was contained. And then, somehow, he vanished. This is the part of the story that pushes it from bizarre incident into enduring legend. When officers returned, the room was empty. The man was gone. So were his belongings. No one had seen him leave. No alarm had been triggered. No clear explanation emerged for how he escaped. No one could prove whether he had somehow slipped away, whether the entire case had been mistaken, or whether the most impossible detail had happened last. The disappearance transformed the case into something more than a customs error. It became a mystery of absence. Because people vanish all the time. But not like this. Not after presenting a passport from a country that never existed. Not after forcing a room full of officials to question the map of the world. This is where the story fractures into versions. Some say he was taken away by authorities and later released. Some say the entire event was misremembered over time. Some say it never happened exactly as described, and that later, writers expanded a smaller incident into legend. But the reason the tale still grips people is simple. It asks a dangerous question. What if the paperwork was wrong? Or, what if the paperwork was right? The locked room disappearance remains the detail people remember most. It feels like the final insult to logic. Not only did the man arrive from a country that was not there, he allegedly left without crossing the threshold anyone could see. There are no reliable official records widely accepted by historians that confirm every detail of the tale. That uncertainty is exactly why the legend survives. It lives in the gap between documentation and rumor. The more the story is repeated, the more the details sharpen into symbols. The passport becomes evidence of another universe. The country becomes a missing piece of the map. The man becomes a traveler from the wrong version of Earth. It is the kind of detail that turns a customs error into folklore, and folklore into obsession. Theories about the man from Taured fall into several categories. The first is the simplest: fraud. Maybe the man was a con artist. Maybe Taured was not a real country, but a fabricated identity used for smuggling, deception, or illegal travel. Maybe the passport was a clever fake, and the entire story of a non-existent nation was a misunderstanding amplified over time. That explanation is practical. It is also incomplete. Because fraud does not easily explain why the story became so elaborate, or why so many retellings share the same core elements: the non-existent nation, the confusion at customs, and the disappearance. Of course, repetition can create false certainty. Stories spread, details mutate, and a small incident can become a legend. The second theory is psychological. Perhaps the man genuinely believed what he said. Perhaps he was mentally ill, delusional, or suffering from confusion caused by stress, travel, or some unknown condition. In that scenario, the passport would still be fake or altered, but the conviction behind it would be real. This theory has emotional weight. It explains the seriousness, the anger, the persistence. It explains why the man might have been so difficult to question. But it does not answer the vanished room detail unless later storytellers added it. The third theory is bureaucratic error. This is the least dramatic, but often the most likely in real life. Confused records, misidentified documents, translation problems, a passport from a small or poorly understood region, a misunderstanding that snowballed because officials could not immediately verify the story. History is full of strange cases that sound impossible until paperwork catches up. Not every mystery is a doorway to another dimension. Sometimes it is just a filing failure with better lighting. And then there is the theory that made the story famous: the parallel universe theory. In that version, Taured was not a lie. It was a nation from another branch of reality. The man did not invent it. He came from a world almost identical to ours, except for one political detail our own history never produced. This idea fits the legend beautifully because it gives the story cosmic scale. It turns an airport incident into a rupture in reality. It suggests the man was not a liar, but a traveler who crossed from one timeline into another by accident. It is also the least provable theory of all. But perhaps that is why people love it. The parallel universe explanation offers a shape to the unknown. It says the impossible event was not random. It had structure. It had rules. It meant something. And maybe that is the real power of the legend. It takes a boring setting, an airport customs desk, and asks us to imagine a crack in the architecture of reality. A man walks in carrying the wrong passport. He insists the world is mistaken. And for one moment, the world cannot prove him wrong. The man from Taured remains one of history's strangest mysteries. Whether it was a misunderstanding, a fabrication, or a legend that grew beyond the facts, the story endures because it challenges something fundamental. Our confidence in borders, our trust in documents, our belief that the world is fully mapped and understood. Because if one man truly arrived from a country that never existed, then reality may be less certain than we think. Or perhaps, in 1954, a confused traveler stepped into Haneda Airport, and a simple disagreement became an immortal mystery. Either way, the question remains, was Taured merely a mistake on a map? Or a place just beyond our reality? And if someone crossed over once, what else might have slipped through unnoticed?